You're listening to Boobies and Newbies, brought to you by the Frolic Podcast Network. This episode is brought to you by Kensington's newest title, The Most Eligible Bride in London, by USA Today bestselling author Ella Quinn. Perfect for the Bridgerton binge watchers and fans of Tessa Dare and Lisa Kleypas, USA Today bestselling author Ella Quinn is known for her passion-filled and witty take on the glittering world of the ton in Regency London. With the third book in her charming Lords of London series, a former rogue on the path to reputation redemption is drawn to the sister of a woman he once wronged. Kidnapped. Y'all, I am all for a reformed rogue in historical romance. Throw in a large extended family, witty humor, and a dash of adventure, and I am in. While I haven't read the previous books in the Lords of London series, I had no problem whatsoever reading The Most Eligible Bride in London as a standalone, and honestly, it just made me want to backtrack and read the first two books in the series. What can I say? I'm a sucker for a rake. Always have been, always will be. You can find The Most Eligible Bride in London by Ella Quinn wherever books are sold. Find out more at kensingtonbooks.com. And now, on to the show. Welcome to Boobies and Newbies, the podcast that asks novice romance readers to think outside the dick in a box and brave the unbridled world of erotica. I'm your host, Kelly Reynolds, and today we are diving headfirst into one of my favorite relationships to read in romance novels today, the MMF polyamorous romance. Believe me when I say I have a lot to talk about with this one, but before we get down and dirty, and y'all, there is a lot of dirty in this book, let's discuss some business. As always, you can listen to past episodes of Boobies and Newbies on your favorite podcast app or on our website, boobiesandnewbies.com. You can find and follow the podcast across social media at Boobies Podcast, even on TikTok. And if you're a fan of the show and you've got 5 minutes or so to spare, I would greatly appreciate if you leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Last but not least, if you would like to show the podcast maybe a little extra love and support, might I recommend you join us on Patreon? We've got monthly patron-only events, early sneak peeks, bonus clips, and so much more. And you gain instant access to it for as little as $1 per month. You will, of course, find links to all of the above in today's show notes. And now that that's out of the way, allow me to introduce today's guest. She's the host of Ignorance Was Bliss, a podcast about how we become who we are. Please join me in welcoming Kate Wallinga.
That's me. Hello. Thank you for letting me come play.
That's me. It sounds like you're about to start like your own, this is my musical theater nerd showing, but it sounds like you're about to start like your own musical number. That's me.
Well, I don't know if you could see it, but I did, Jazz.
Yeah.
We're fussy,
See, we're on the same page already. Well, Kate, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about Ignorance Was Bliss?
Sure. So I am a forensic psychologist by trade and also a crisis clinician. And there's whole long explanations about what that is. But for a while, that wasn't relevant to my life because in 2014, I broke my back. Don't do that. Bad idea.
Okay, good.
Terrible
Taking notes.
plan. Yeah. And so I spent a couple of years recovering from that and also moping. And then there came a point in time where I have 4 kids. I've been married for 21 years now, and my father moved in with us. And so I felt like I was spending all of my time serving in like a supportive role to the people that I lived with and not really having anything that was mine. And I felt like I was literally losing my own voice. And so on New Year's Day of 2018, I walked up to my husband and either gently tapped him on the shoulder or assertively grabbed him by the shirt collar, depending on who's telling the story. And I said to him, I'm starting a podcast. And being a smart man, his answer was, okay.
Good job, honey. Good choice.
Right. Well done. And so it started as a true crime show because that's what I know. And I thought, I kept hearing people on true crime podcasts who would ask, like, why would this happen? What does it mean to be not guilty by reason of insanity? Or what would make someone do this sort of thing? And I'd be like, those are super easy questions for me. And then I realized that the reason that they're easy questions is because I spent 12 years in school and 10 years in the industry. And so why don't I just start a podcast and talk about it?
Sure.
And so it was true crime for a while. After a bit, it kind of came home to me that it wasn't especially ideal for me to stay just in true crime, both because it felt like work, but without the commensurate paycheck. And also the true crime community can get a little toxic.
And that's not limited to the true crime community too. Like I am a proud member of the romance community, and let me tell you, there is also toxicity there for sure.
Oh, for sure, anywhere you go, for absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the podcast community, but in true crime specifically, there's a fair amount of gatekeeping, and there was a fair amount of laughing at victims, laughing at perpetrators, laughing at families, just drinking and laughing, and I was like, I can't do that. So you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave that to them, because there's still many of my favorite shows are true crime, but what I'm going to do is help. I feel like if I pull the lens back and I talk to people from different genres about different things, maybe you can't understand immediately, or you don't want to understand what it is like inside somebody's head if they're a serial rapist or murderer, but you can understand what it's like to have chronic insomnia, or to become a writer or a podcaster or an actor or that kind of things. And so I sort of bounce around now between talking of people from all different genres and all different creators and types, and I keep going back to true crime because that's sort of where my heart lies, but less so. I sort of talk to let's be the real answer is I'm a pod slut and I'll talk to anybody.
Oh my gosh, that, if you don't have that on a t-shirt, like just
I should.
Big bold letters, pod slut. I think you really need to, because I will be the first one to buy it.
I will talk to my merch designer, who happens to be my oldest child, about that, because it seems like that's a hole in my merch offerings for sure. So yeah, so it's just been super fun. You know, I had talked to everything from sex workers to priests, and you can decide which one of those was more fun. And you know, ultimately, it's just about understanding people's stories and letting people tell the stories, and that's the thing that I was missing, that connection.
Yeah, no, I love that. I mean, of course, I too am always drawn to a good true crime story, don't get me wrong, and I love romance, obviously, but I think there's something about diversifying the people you surround yourself with, the media you're consuming, the books you're reading, the stories you're hearing and telling, like that just makes you a more well-rounded person. And I think by talking with so many people with so many different backgrounds, I'm sure there's places for you to make, you know, discoveries about your own life and your own choices too. Like that's what I always think of as a writer and a teacher, is whenever I'm working in a creative writing setting with some students, the amount of discoveries that I'll make about my own work while offering feedback on something that they're working on, and they tell me the same thing, that they have the same experience as well. So I love that you're broadening your strokes, so to speak. I love that you're broadening the topics and the people that you're chatting with.
It's wild. You know, I run a little bit socially anxious because I have, you know, I'm like the hipster pandemic. Like I did lockdown before it was cool.
Ooh.
And, you know, so like I can walk, I can leave the house, but I don't very often. And I hadn't for a long time. And this is my way of connecting back out in the world.
Yeah.
And I have listened to, you know, entire arcs of gamer podcasts.
Love it.
That I never would have, like, I just would have scrolled on by. And I did scroll on by before. But then once I started to meet these people and I was like, okay, this is somebody who's really fantastic to talk to. I want to hear what they do. And so it's been the best. It's absolutely been the best. And I was just looking for, honestly, I was looking for a hobby that nobody else in my house could follow me down while I was doing.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? Like,
something that's just for you.
I'm also a knitter.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, because I'm a knitter, but they can sit in the room while I'm knitting, and then they
Yes.
continue to talk at me. And it didn't seem to matter if I asked them nicely or not nicely to please stop. Oh dear God, just 5 minutes. And so if I'm like, I'm going to go record, they're like, oh, well, you can't talk to her.
That's your time.
Recording.
Yes.
Right. And so it's just been great. It has made this tremendous difference in my life of opening up my world. And so I'm 4 years in, I'm creeping up on 400 episodes.
Incredible.
That have been released. And I have absolutely no intention of stopping. And in fact, this year I'm starting a second show that will be hardcore true crime.
Okay.
It's a deep dive into a really horrific murder and investigation that happened in Washington State in 1977.
Oh God, that's my neighbor. I'm in Oregon, so yikes. I'm excited and terrified.
As well you should be. Yes.
Awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to that, and congrats on, almost 400 episodes. I mean, that is something to marvel at, especially when like the average lifespan of a podcast is like 6 episodes. So to go 4 years, 400 episodes, that is quite the accomplishment. You should be very proud.
It's been the best. It's worth every swear word that I have expressed at Audacity when it screws me up for the editing. It's like, it's all worth it.
Where can everybody find, follow, listen to the podcast, check out what's up with you?
My website is iwbpodcast.com. So ignorance was bliss, iwbpodcast.com. And that's my handle on all of the social medias.
Easy.
At IWB Podcast. Yeah, that way I don't forget it. And so hopefully other people don't as well. And because I'm home on disability, I'm online all the time. And I am thrilled when people hit me up. I've had everything from, hey, can I come on your show? To, hey, this episode sucks. And honestly, that means you listened. So that's cool.
I love that you pointed that out. And I 100% agree. Like, I wish I got more messages from people that were even maybe just disagreeing with something that I said in an episode, because then at least I could say, hey, you know what? Thanks for listening. So I appreciate the feedback either way.
For real.
Well, let's get down to some romance talk, Kate. And first of all, I'm going to introduce today's reading, and then I'd love to know a little bit about your relationship with romance novels in general. But let me tell everybody a little bit about the book we're going to be talking about today, and that is Affinity by, I'm not sure if it's Layne or Dyan Layne, but I do want to specify it is not Diane Lane, the actress. There is a Dyan Layne. And this is like I mentioned, a male-male, female polyamorous romance, which was published in October 2020. It's available on Amazon for free if you have Kindle Unlimited. This is also the second book in the Red Door series, and now, having read this book and without having read the book that precedes this one, I do just want to tell everybody that I think you can read it as a standalone, but the impression that I got while reading it is that maybe there might be a little bit of overlap with the events of the first book. I still haven't read any of the other books in this series. I just know that as I was reading Affinity, there would be occasional events that were happening that then kind of seemed to just disappear and not be 100% explained or wrapped up. And I'm going to guess that those are things that are focused on a lot more in the first book. That's my assumption. I cannot confirm either way. And honestly, I don't know if I care enough to go read it and find out. But if anybody wants to prove me wrong or tell me what's up with it, that is totally fine. And then the last thing I'll say about this before I turn it over to Kate for a second is just that I got this recommendation via TikTok. And that's not something that I generally do. I know a lot of people are getting romance recommendations or just book recommendations in general on Book Talk, as we call it. But I have found that most of the books that are usually recommended are kind of the same ones over and over again, or they're ones that maybe I read like 3 or 4 years ago that have had this sudden resurgence in popularity on TikTok. And so this was one, though, where I saw somebody talking about how this was their favorite polyamorous romance that they had ever read. And based off of their description, I thought it sounded worth reading. And so that is how this book came to be on our discussion topic today. But just letting you know. And then also, I asked Kate what she was interested in reading, and I believe your words were something akin to something really dirty, or like you wanted something really out there and wild. Correct me if I'm wrong.
My recollection is that you said like what how hard do you want it? Like,
yeah.
I don't know exactly how to word that part, but that my answer is that, like, I have no space in my life or brain for rape, degradation, or age play. But otherwise, bring it. The physical process of reading this book was that I ended up reading it all in one day.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Because I had eye surgery, and I expected it to hurt, but I didn't expect it to permanently change my vision. And they still haven't been able to answer whether it's permanent or whether it'll get better over time. But right now I can't see out of my right eye. And so that makes my left eye is working overtime. And so when we were planning to record this, I was like, okay, I got to buckle down and I just got to do this. And I'm going to do it. I'm going to read it during the day, and I'm going to just burn through this. And it's a lot to burn through. It's like when you don't have any sort of break. Like I wanted, the mom in me was like, I hope they're well hydrated.
Nope.
Do you know what I mean?
Yep.
Like, ooh, there's some busy individuals in this story.
Very.
And I had to sort of remind myself, like, okay, just because I'm reading this all in one day doesn't mean it's all set in one day. And so they probably slept and they probably hydrated.
But we'll never know.
We'll never know. And so, I mean, I hope that they're healthy. I hope that they're safe. That is my hope.
Well, good. Well, I'm glad. Yeah, this was my hope at delivering what you asked for in terms of the content. I know that we both have some thoughts about this book, but we will get to those in a moment. First things first, I do just want to ask you, Kate, what's your experience been with romance novels before this read? Are you an avid reader? Are you a newbie to the genre? Somewhere in between?
I would say somewhere in between. I used to read quite a bit more romance.
Okay.
In large part because, I grew up in upstate New York, and I would go spend every summer with my great-grandmother. And when I was in my sort of mid-teens, I finally sort of clued in to, like, I don't know whether it was a matter of I forgot to bring my own books, because I have always been a voracious reader and kind of a undiscerning reader, like, bring it. Okay. Even if I don't like the book, I'll read the thing anyway, just because I'm curious about how people build worlds and tell their stories.
Yeah.
But at one point, I showed up at my great-grandmother's place, which is in the middle of nowhere. She had a TV that had 2 channels that didn't come in very good.
Of course.
And that was it.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, what am I get like? There's only so much staring into the middle distance and having thoughts that a 15-year-old can do. And so I raided her bookshelf, and Grandma, like, good for you. Get it.
The amount of grandmas that enabled romance readers today. Like, we have so many grandmas.
She was not fucking around, let me say. Like, this was not like Jane Austen
Nora
stuff.
Roberts.
This was, wow, Grandma, this is why you don't need to turn the heat up at night. So, and so that was just sort of my earlier exposure to it, and I read a fair amount of that, and then, so I kind of have gone in and out through my life, and then in 2012, I got a Kindle.
Nice.
For the first time, and learned how to use BookBub.
Okay.
And of course, as well, there's Kindle Unlimited, and so my husband is a college professor. We have 4 kids. We're broke, like always, and so I was into the free books, and there's a lot of free romance out there, and there's also a lot of terrible romance out there. But I didn't care. I tend to be borderline obsessive in the, if I start reading your book, I'm going to finish your book.
Nice.
Like, even if it hurts my brain, I'm going to follow the whole story to the end.
I'm guilty of that too. I wish I could, not
I
finish
would love
books.
to be like, no, not for me.
Yeah.
No, it might be. You never know. It might be. And it's funny that you mentioned Nora Roberts specifically, because it's not that I love her stuff in a deep and abiding way, but she's like comfort reading for me in a way.
I understand that.
I think because she's fairly formulaic.
Mm-hmm. I think there's some truth to that as far as the entire romance genre goes, just because, and I think you'll hear this both as like a criticism as well as a positive of the genre, is that the one qualifier we have as like a basic understanding of what romance is that there's a happily ever after, or at least a happily for now. And that is the one rule kind of understood amongst romance readers and writers and publishers, is that there needs to be a happily ever after. So it is formulaic in a way, in that, no matter what, if I'm picking up a book that is marketed as a romance, it's going to end happily. Like that, this couple is going to end up, or throuple in this case, is going to end up together. So there's something comforting about that. There's something reassuring about that, knowing it as you go in to read a romance novel.
Right. And unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, I've reached a point where, because I know that I'm going to derive that sort of comfort, if I'm reading a Nora Roberts book, my husband asks, what are you reading? And I tell him that it's a Nora Roberts book, his answer immediately is, are you okay? Because it has become like I only read that when I'm in a dark or a difficult headspace.
Okay.
But that's fine. To me, it's like, it's self-care in its way.
For sure.
I've leaned into the concept of comfort reading.
Yeah.
But when I do it, my husband's like, do you need chocolate or something? And the answer is always yes.
The answer is always yes. Like, regardless of comfort reading.
For real.
Yeah. No, and I think something about the pandemic in general is that it's trauma bonded the world together. Like, this is trauma that everybody is going through, whether it's on a larger scale for some folks, a smaller scale for others. We're all experiencing trauma. We're all living with trauma at this moment in time because of this. And I think that's why in the last couple years, we've seen a huge increase in the amount of romance being read, the amount of readers, hopping on over to Book Talk and Bookstagram and wanting to get their hands on more. It is a comforting space. I mean, the genre in general is very comforting. There are some romances that are more comforting than others. This would not be what I would call the most comforting.
This is not a comfort
reads. And with that being said, let me give everyone a synopsis for Affinity, because then there are things to say. So
buckle up, kids.
We will start with the synopsis, and it goes like this. Be careful what you wish for. When Chloe was 17, she wished she belonged to the man in the poster on her bedroom wall, Taylor Kerrigan, lead guitarist of the debauched band Venery, tattooed rock god with a bad boy smirk, reputed? Sure. Sexual deviant. He's known as a sexual deviant. Put it that way. And a puppy. What? Oh, she wished for also a puppy.
I think she also wished for a puppy, but I had to read that more than once because I was like, he's reputed, he's whatever. He's got a reputation of being a sexual bad boy and a puppy. Like, that feels like, wow. Like, wow, Kelly really took me seriously when I said anything goes. Like, wow.
This is it. Yeah, that is a really weird, like, thought to include in this. And there's going to be some repetition in the synopsis, I will say. I don't think it's a great synopsis in general. But yeah, tattooed rock god with a bad boy smirk, reputed sexual deviant, and a puppy. Make a wish, Chloe. But Chloe isn't 17 anymore, and now the only thing she wishes for is to be loved by the man right here in front of her, Jesse Nolan, former football player, soft-spoken bartender with the purest heart, eyes she could drown in, and a smile she wishes was only for her. Maybe it is. And a puppy. Oh my God, we need to let this puppy thing go. Make a wish, Chloe. She kept the poster of the bad boy rock star, but she left her girlhood fantasy behind when she packed up her life for college. The city. That just seems so misplaced too. She thought she was ready for whatever awaited for her. She wasn't. New friends, new family, new loves, new dreams. Make a wish, Chloe. Because sometimes they come true, and sometimes you get more than you ever wished for. Okay, just talking about that synopsis in general, I don't even think it's clear from the synopsis that this is a polyamorous romance, let alone an MMF polyamorous romance.
Not at all. And that's something why I do sympathize with any creator, podcaster to author to musician, whatever. I sympathize with the desire to hold some things back and to have a measure of surprise. That being said, there are certain pieces of information that, so if let's compare it to podcasting. If you're gonna release a true crime podcast and it is going to involve sexual assault or violence to children, you need to say so.
Oh, absolutely.
Because there are people who will listen to, he wore his neighbor's head as a hat totally comfortably. That's cool. Not a problem.
Yep.
But don't touch children, don't include rape, and also, of course, don't touch the puppy.
I was about to say, it's kids and animals. It's always kids and animals for me. Like, that is the really tough one for sure.
And so just that sort of some heads up, like there are people, especially with this, and I'm going to ride onto it, that the opening, whatever it's called, before chapter 1, before the prologue.
Yeah.
It starts with a Bible verse.
Interesting choice.
And that's exactly, I was like, that, I know a lot of people who choose to read Christian romance. There are some books that I've read that I quite enjoy that are Christian romance, and I don't identify as Christian.
Yeah.
But I like the author, I like their style, and so cool. That's another form of comfort read. But if I read that description of the book and then I start the book and I read a Bible verse.
Yeah. It's a little...
And then 5 pages in...
misleading.
We're going in a different direction. And so I just feel like I understand the element of surprise, but I value consent more than I value surprise.
I agree. And I've spoken in depth about content warnings on this podcast. Like, I am a huge believer in content trigger warnings for sure. I will say the author in the author's note does say this book contains subject matter which may be sensitive or triggering to some and is intended for mature audiences. That just seems like kind of a cop-out to me because, like, there's no specifying about what it is specifically that's going to be triggering. Because like you said, there are certain things I am happy to read a dark romance in some regards. There are certain things that I will be okay reading, but that doesn't mean that I can read every dark romance. There will be other things that just don't work for me. So thankfully, I will say, I think how you know this is going to be, at least if not a polyamorous romance, there would be some sort of threesome situation happening, is because it does have a very hot cover. I think the cover of the book is gorgeous. They have got 3 incredibly beautiful humans, 2 of which are these long-haired, bearded men. One of them is covered in tattoos. This is, by the way, not how I pictured the men in this book at all. Like, these were not the men that I envisioned.
Yeah, no.
At all. That being said, they are gorgeous. So that was kind of like the only, I think, clear indication that you're about to read a polyamorous romance. And for anybody who's new to the world of reading poly, and I love reading poly stories because it's a relationship dynamic that is very interesting to me, in that poly romances are different from one another. Not every poly relationship looks the same. And so this is what we would call an MMF romance, because not only do the men have a relationship with the woman, but they also have a relationship with each other. They have a sexual relationship, a romantic relationship with each other. So that is kind of how you differentiate between MMF and MFM, in which you're kind of like sandwiching the woman in between the 2 men, and they're having a relationship with her, but they're separated by that. They're not necessarily engaged together. So just a little distinction, that this is an MMF romance, which I like because I want all the swords crossing all the time, as often as I can get it. So there was everybody with everybody in this book. So let me tell you, when I first heard about this, I was really excited because I heard rock star, I heard former football player, and the girl that loves them both. And I thought, wow, I'm into this. And then as I started to read it, it was clear that the 2 men are the ones that are in the relationship first, Jesse and Taylor. Taylor, I honestly kept mixing up their names. Jesse is the former football player turned bar owner. Taylor is the rock star, and he is still a rock star. He's touring and everything. They are already in a relationship, and I liked that. I feel like there aren't enough poly stories that actually start with the men in the relationship. I think usually it's a lot more that they all kind of fall in love at the same time, or the woman is with one of the men and they're attracted to another man. So I thought that was an interesting change to, I guess, the typical dynamic. The only other book I can think of that we've read for the podcast, at least, that's had a similar dynamic to start with is The Witch's Wolves by Ellie Mae McGregor, which is the polyamorous werewolf book that is also MMF. But unlike that one, I had some major issues with how the relationships begin. I guess the first half of the book I had a lot of issues with, to the point where if I wasn't reading this for the podcast, I probably would have put it down. I probably would have DNF'd this book for 2 major reasons. The first of which is lube. And I've said this before, I think most romance bloggers and readers and writers are on the same page when it comes to using lube in romance, in that there's this unwritten rule of, if you're going to include any kind of butt stuff, there needs to be lube. And I think years ago, and when I say years ago, I mean this could have been like 2-3 years ago, it could have been 20 years ago, I don't think it was as prevalent. I don't think it was as common for people to specifically be writing about there being lube in romance, to specifically write about there being condoms or birth control in romance. But as the conversations around these topics have become more open, authors have been being more open about putting it in their books and saying, this is what people want to hear about, so I'm going to put it in. And I was understanding to a point where people weren't including the mention of lube in romance, but they specifically go out of their way in this book to say, no, we never use lube. We hate this stuff. It's not for us. We refuse to use lube. I think I even have a quote from like one of the first times Taylor and Jesse have sex, and he says, "No lube. He and Taylor both hated the stuff and refrained from using it as much as possible. There wasn't anything better than a wet finger or a tongue anyway. Saliva." And I'm just like, I don't understand. Like, this is a book that came out in 2020. You're talking about like, this has probably the most sex scenes I've ever read in a romance novel. Like, it was back-to-back sex. There is a lot of butt stuff. Yeah, there's a lot of everything. And that's a whole other thing I'll talk about in a second, is just the amount of sex. But what were your thoughts? Did the lube thing run across your mind too while reading?
Especially because here is this girl whom the author goes out of her way to make sure that we understand that her vulva could take, like, both fists and your neighbor at the same time, like, to a degree. Like, there's this feeling of, like, the train's coming through the station kind of feeling. Like, it's just
full speed ahead.
You know what I mean? But that she's never ever had anal. She's never been interested in it. She in fact has been explicitly disinterested in it.
Yeah.
And the first sex scene in which there's butt stuff, repeated references to how small and tight her butt is. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, okay, it's okay that you don't love it, but having some experience in this particular area myself, I can tell you that foreplay only goes so far.
Right.
And that it's okay to need lube. It's okay to need even the numbing type or the not numbing type, because it's both the, hey, that's kind of uncomfortable, and also the, as I said before, like, look, people get dehydrated after a while. And, and so it's like, there's nothing wrong with needing it. And, I can remember in the early 2000s, so my oldest kid was born in 2000. And at that point I was 22 and had never used lube, had never needed such a thing. But then after you have the baby, your body goes, everything you thought you knew, you don't know anymore.
Just kidding.
And going to buy lube for the first time, because your hormones are all over the place. Sure. And some days you don't need it at all. And other days you are like, please don't. No. The answer is just don't even. I know that you're having the thought, and I need you to stop having that thought.
Nope. Put it away.
And so the answer is, yeah, lube helps quite a bit. I guess parallel to all of this is that they happened to find a girl for whom creating moisture, creating her own lube seems to come quite naturally, and we really sexualize the fact that she's a squirter, and she has just like, here's somebody who probably needs to wear panty liners at all times just in case. Like, the way they describe it is just like, this is somebody who probably leaves a mark on every chair she's ever sat in.
Yeah,
like
regardless
the book
of how
describes
turned
it.
On she is.
And so that's all well and good, but what if they fall for somebody who can't naturally do that, but we still hate lube? Like, that, I had a hard time with that.
I had a hard time even when it wasn't with her. Like, I had a hard time with just the fact that the two guys just, like, are so adamant about, like, we don't do that we don't touch that stuff. Like, I just think there's a better way to go about it. Like, even to say, like, we don't normally use lube because I don't know, like, just something. Like, I don't know. It just rubbed me the wrong way. Like, in general, if there's butt stuff going on and there's not mention of lube, it already bothers me. But then to, like, actually go out of your way to mention how much you're adverse to lube, I guess, is just the part that really tipped me over. So that was, like, red flag number 1 for me. Red flag number 2 was, like, a little bit. Here's the thing. I really enjoyed the second half of the book a lot more than the first half. And that's because by about the halfway point, if not a little sooner, the three of them they're in a relationship. Like, they're in a committed relationship, the three of them together. Getting to that point was a little bit of a struggle for me to read. And I think it's because I have friends in poly relationships. I have friends who identify as poly. I've read a lot of polyamorous romance. And this was a dynamic that I don't know what the best word to say for it is, in that Jesse has this instant connection with Chloe, right? That's her name. Chloe wants a puppy. And she works for him. She's younger. She's about 21. The guys are closer to like late 20s, almost 30. And he and Taylor have had an ongoing open relationship for what seems like years. Like, they've been friends for a really long time. They go back all the way to the UK where they grew up and everything and met in school. And so they have an ongoing thing, but Jesse doesn't talk about it with Chloe at all. He never tells her he's in an open relationship. He never tells her he's sleeping with other people. He never tells her he's sleeping with another man, which shouldn't matter in the grand scheme of things. But I think just being open about like what your relationship status is when you are pursuing somebody else, especially the way he is. It was never like a one night stand. I'm just in it for the hookup. Like, he is clearly very much into Chloe and she is very much into him, and they fall in love very quickly. So the amount of information he's withholding from her while pursuing her was very gross to me. Like, I did not like that at all.
Absence of consent.
Yes.
The absence of consent really bothered me as well. Both because, A, you can't make an informed decision without information. But B, what you're saying, every healthy poly relationship that I know of, every healthy open relationship that I know of, which arguably I know of more unhealthy monogamous, especially straight relationships than I do of like, I can only think of, off the top of my head, I can only think of one unhealthy open relationship that of someone that I'm close to. And of the people who have told me that they're involved in poly, or whom I know closely that are involved in a polyam relationship, they emphasize communication.
They have to
so much. So, like, from way before there's any touching, way before there's any butt stuff, we're going to talk about where people stand and who stands in the room and how we do this. And instead there's this like I was talking to a friend of mine, and I did a little background, by the way, just to briefly back up to the lube thing. Dyan, Layne, the author, is a nurse.
Interesting.
And so
that makes me even angrier.
I'm saying, so that was the thing, because I went and looked it up, because I said to a friend of mine who is involved in a poly relationship, I was like, rate for me on like a 1 to 10, like, how important is the sex and how important is the communication? And the answer that I got was, between the two, if I had to, the sex would be a 0 and the communication is a 10.
And I have
like,
no doubt that makes perfect
comparison.
And we're talking about if you're having a healthy, open, polyamorous relationship.
But he was like, even unhealthy, there's still like, sex would be maybe a 3 to a 7 of communication. But you have to communicate, because pretty soon they're gonna catch you.
Yes.
And so you at least have to have some baseline understanding of who the players are and why is this other man or woman contacting you, and what constitutes cheating.
I was going to say,
what doesn't.
Because that to me is the major difference between what it means to be in an open relationship and what it means to cheat, is the communication factor.
Exactly. And so I was just like, tell me if I am wrong, talking to my friend about, like, to me, here is a brief synopsis of this book. It feels to me like what I am reading is a cis-het woman's idea of what a poly relationship, like how it would unfold.
Yeah. And here's the thing is I know next to nothing about Dyan Layne. I didn't even know she was a nurse. So I could not begin to tell you about what her relationship status is by any means. However, that was 100% my assumption as well. And it just didn't, there was just an element of falseness to it for me because of that it was especially that first half of the book, just there was something so wrong about it that just made me want to set it aside, because on top of him lying to Chloe, because let's be honest, he's lying. Like, this is a lie of omission, and I don't think he's sharing all the details with Taylor, his other partner, either. But on top of that, we reach a point where Jesse basically tells both partners, who, mind you, have never met each other in real life. Yes, she's lusted after this rock star on her wall for years, but there's a difference between fantasizing about the man on a poster and finding out that that man is also in a relationship with your boyfriend who you're saying I love you to. He tells each of them, not only do I want to be with each of you, but I want you guys to be together. I want you to fall in love with him. I want you to be in love with her. And that was the part that just was so unbelievable to me, because I don't know. It's the word I'm thinking of, and I know it's not right, but it feels like he's pimping them out to each other. Like,
well, a little bit. Well, see, I went more in the. There was this, like, I don't ever like to feel. I don't ever like to use the word childlike when I'm talking about sex scenes, but that's almost what it felt like. It was like an immature.
Yeah.
I want this, so therefore it will happen.
Right. Like, I want everybody.
I want everybody, and I want everybody to love each other. And I just think about, like, there are friends of mine that I want to enjoy each other. Mm-hmm. Like, just friend-wise, no butt stuff, just friends. that, like, I want them to enjoy each other, but you can't make it happen just through will.
Yeah, naivety, I guess, is kind of.
Yeah, that's a much more diplomatic way of wording it. I like that better. But there it is. It feels naive. But here's somebody who shouldn't be naive.
Yeah,
because the backstory for Jesse is that he lost a former. But it doesn't. I guess it's not entirely clear to me. I read it twice, and I still wasn't entirely clear whether he lost the former girlfriend because he was bisexual, or he lost her and he was bisexual.
I kind of interpreted it as when she found out he was bisexual, she broke up with him. Like, I think there is kind
That's how I read it.
Yeah. And I actually, I will say, I do think there are a couple great points made throughout the book that kind of highlight the biphobia, especially biphobia with men. I think there's a passage I highlighted that I was like, wow, this is the best thing I've read in the book so far. And I'll just give you a little taste. I think this was coming from Taylor, Rockstar Taylor, who said, "You don't know how difficult it is to be a bisexual man. Neither gender accepts you, really. Straight women don't want you. Gay men don't want you. Everyone expects you to choose a side eventually, but I love that I get to experience the best of men and women. My love isn't limited to male or female. I see the beauty in everyone." And I was like, oh, this is great. I wish this is kind of where the conversation was more focused, because that is a one paragraph snippet you get in a sea full of sex, Bliss sex, because
Bliss sex.
This book, I'm not even kidding. I'm not exaggerating at all when I say I am 99% confident I've never read more sex in a romance novel before. That's not to say it was the best sex or the most gratifying sex scenes I've read, but I don't know if there was a chapter that didn't have some
for
kind
sure
of sexual
there wasn't a
content.
chapter. There are times when I'm reading other books where there are times where I'm like, I don't want to read this right now. Like, for instance, if I am surrounded, as I often am, by children, it feels a little creepy sometimes to be fully, balls deep as it is in a sex scene. Like, that's not necessarily ideal. And so I will often skim through. But I felt like, man, this is awfully early in their relationship to have figured out exactly what works, and we're not going to try any of the other stuff out there.
Oh, yeah. They never had bad sex either. It was like everything they did so good, so good. And again, I mean, it's not often that I read romance novels where they have quote unquote bad sex, but there are plenty of romances where it takes a while to get things where they want it, or maybe it starts off a little softer and then eventually we lead into like, oh, well, I have this fantasy, or ooh, I didn't know this worked for me. But nope, it's clockwork from the very beginning. Clockwork, no problem. Everybody's good. Everybody is happy fucking everybody. Like, no problem.
Well, and by the way, like, let's go ahead and spoil the fuck out of the book.
Yes.
That she gets pregnant.
Oh my God. Can we also talk about, I'm not even kidding when I say what the day I finished. Okay. So unlike you, I did not read this book in one sitting. I actually was so excited about this book when I heard about it on TikTok and I told you what you were going to be reading. I read like the first, I don't know, I'd say like 30-40% in one sitting, got so annoyed and pissed off with it that I set it aside and then finished the rest of the book about a week ago. And I logged on to an online like writing group that I have that night after having finished it. And I said to them, you guys, I just read the most bananas book, but the absolute worst thing about this is the awful name that this girl gives her baby in this book, because I was thrown. And I mean, I'm talking about, I came from the generation of reading the Twilight books, and we had to deal with Renesmee as a baby name in Twilight. And she names this child Chandon. Chandon William Arthur Kerrigan Nolan. He is going to get his ass beat in the playground. Like,
for real.
Chandon. And you know what? Here's the thing. They had this lovely marriage between the three of them, and they acknowledge we can't all three get married legally, but look, the two of us will get married. We'll have this like joining ceremony amongst the three of us. Love it. I think that's beautiful. She takes both of their last names. Fine. I'm perfectly okay with this. When they have the baby and they are discussing names, one of the men says, well, today's Prince William's birthday, so let's name him William. The other gentleman says, how about Arthur? William's a prince's name. Arthur's a king name. So here I am thinking, okay, William Arthur Kerrigan Nolan. It's a mouthful, but I can buy into that.
Okay, but how? Okay, but let me just step in and say that if we're gonna go with William Arthur, it has to be Nolan Kerrigan, so that his initials are wank.
Oh my God! Stop it. And they're British. Like, one of them is British and one of them is Irish. How did nobody put that together? But you know what? It doesn't matter, because Chloe who wants a puppy, has to add in, oh, I've been thinking of some names too. His name is Chandon. And I was just like, I don't even know where that came from. Like, the girls I was telling this to were like, was it a combination of names? Was it a combination of the two guys' names? Was it like the grandparents' names? No, it was just Chandon.
Well, Chandon is Taylor's middle name.
Was it?
And this stood out to me because specifically when Taylor and Chloe meet at this bizarre setup of before dinner, she's ready to fucking bolt.
Oh, yeah.
Because she's watching her boyfriend feel up his boyfriend and she's not coping well. I mean, give her some credit here that she's rolling with a lot. And after dinner, they have a non-penetrative threesome on the living room floor. So, like, Okay, time doesn't work in their world the way it works in my world. That's cool. Okay. But she, like, there's this awkward, as one would expect, there's an awkward, like, introduce each other, and there's this whole cake metaphor that I don't like.
Oh, I remember
Okay,
that. Yeah.
that is what it is. And then she introduces herself, and that stood out to me because her name, and until this point, I didn't pick up on the last name, but her name, she introduces herself for reasons unclear with her full name, which was Chloe Elizabeth Bennett. My favorite book, including one of my tattoos, is Pride and Prejudice.
Great.
So, Elizabeth Bennett.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Got it, on it. And he replies with Taylor, Chandon, Kerrigan. And I got stuck right there. Like, am I...
I must have missed that. I must have missed that because that was part of my first read over a month ago was, and it just... You know what? I probably thought it was stupid then too, and then I thought it was extra stupid when they named the baby Chandon.
It felt weird, and so, but that's it's like why would we name the baby after one of the men when we don't know which one is the biological father? And I respect their choice not to find out which is the biological father, but then don't name okay, whatever. But there was just sort of this weird, like, failure to acknowledge the biological changes before, during, and after pregnancy.
Well, and I think part of the problem too was, it's funny you mention time, because I think the way that time passes in this book is inconsistent and a little bit unclear, because there will be times, and again, I think this ties into also the fact that there are events that happen in the first book that we get a glimpse of from the perspective of either Chloe, Jesse, or Taylor in this book that they're not necessarily involved in. It'll be like something that one of their friends is involved in or their cousin is involved in. And I think those don't get resolved in this book. We never hear about them again. We suddenly are like skipping 2 months into the future, and it just feels weird. And the pregnancy is interesting because that comes in very late in the book, and yet she goes through the entire pregnancy in the book and gives birth, but it doesn't feel like 9 months. The first 4 chapters feels like 9 months. So
really,
there's definitely like some weird choices made as far as like where to devote more time. And that's not to say I was expecting us to read all the details of her pregnancy, especially when it was so late in the book. But I totally understand what you're saying in that I feel like sometimes there were certain chapters, certain details, definitely certain sex scenes that I could have done without and maybe sacrificed in order to pay a little bit more attention towards other pieces. And for me, there was just so much attention paid to the sexual relationship between the 3 of them. And look, I am here for the hot stuff. Like, I love steamy scenes. I love it. But I feel like there's something that takes away from it if that's all you're getting. Like, you just become numb to what's happening because I'm not really seeing them fall in love.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like love. It doesn't feel like love.
And here's the thing. There are probably plenty of people listening who are like, I'm going to go download this book because I just want some hot, steamy scenes. And all the power to you, honestly. Like, but I will say, I do think there are better ways to be sexy and hot and still have those steamy moments without it being every single page of the story.
So I have 2, perhaps smaller, perhaps not. It really depends on your perspective. The difficulties that I had with the book, aside from the consent and lack thereof.
Yeah.
One being that it feels like it sexualizes polyamory.
Mm-hmm. It does.
And like a lot of the poly people I know are also asexual. And there's no space for that to even be a possibility. It's as though you must want to have sex. You know, you got to want to smash 3 times a day, every day, all day.
It's a huge stereotype. I completely agree.
And I didn't love that. The other thing that I want to throw in there, and it's mentioned 3 times in the book, and it's mentioned briefly. But still, I feel like here's a content warning.
Okay.
That would have been helpful for me to have, and it didn't feel at all helpful to moving this story forward. Maybe it's helpful for other books in the series.
Okay.
Or maybe it's one of those threads of a storyline that got dropped, but they left some of it in.
Okay.
There's reference to a suicide.
Oh,
And
yes. One of the parents.
one of the parents died by suicide, and it was jarring. It didn't feel like it fit in well. I kind of understood why it fit in maybe at some point, although it made it worse
Mm-hmm.
in ways, because at one point the assumption was the suicide happened because of bisexuality.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh, that's not great. That's not good. That's not good at all. But so I have, my father died by suicide. And so not having that in the book
Yeah.
wouldn't have hurt the book at all. We can go just as easily as dad left the family.
Yeah, or disowned his son, you know, whatever it, I completely understand. And I apologize for the fact that you had to read something like that as well without having any sort of warning, because there wasn't one. And I didn't have one to give you because I hadn't read it yet. So.
Right. No, and I'm fine with it. You know, it's not like, 3 years ago, I would not have been fine
Sure.
with it. But 3 years ago, I was very careful and self-protective.
Yes.
And I wouldn't have signed up to read anything without some sort of assurance of, are we not going into these areas at all? And that, or I would have said like, hey, I can't handle any but I can handle discussions of suicide, and I can handle descriptions and means and methods thereof and that kind of thing. I just didn't feel like it fit with the book.
No, I don't. Here's the thing is I don't think it was necessary to begin with, because the assumption is that I think is it Taylor, the rock star, who?
No, it
was
Jesse. It was Jesse's father who died by suicide, and Jesse has spent however long, it's not clear at what age he was, but 10 years, it sounds like a
teenager.
A solid chunk of time that he has spent living without his father, believing that because his father caught him and Taylor having sex, and that his father killed himself because
of that.
He caught
Yeah.
them in the act. And I was like, I feel like that's not sex positive or helpful or moving along the story in a way. And instead, all it did was, in the moment, took me out of the story.
Well, and then on top of it, to give away something that happens much later in the book, is Jesse kind of shares that feeling with his mom when I think she's coming for their wedding that they're having with the three of them. And she basically tells him, oh, no, that's not why he did it. Your dad was actually in love with another man, and our marriage was breaking up because of it, and that's why he did it. And I was like, wait, so
that's not helpful either.
We just turned from him committing suicide because of one male-male relationship to it was another male-male relationship? Like that just feels so unnecessary. And like, yeah, no, I'm with you. There's a lot, like we said earlier, there's a lot of things that are happening in this book that make me wonder about if this author is the one who should necessarily be telling this story, because there are a lot of stereotypes surrounding the poly community. There are a lot of, I think you're right, like an over-sexualization or fetishization of it. And just the way that the three of them come to be in a relationship feels off. There's just a lot of stuff that just didn't feel right. And I've read plenty of other poly romances, so this is not me reading one and saying, I don't like this. This is me comparing it with the other poly romances that I've read and have read really enjoying. So there's something off. And I will say, on a lighter note, I do think it gets better as it goes on. The one thing I really did appreciate is I like the community of people that they have surrounding the three of them, because it's Jesse has opened this bar with his cousins. It's clear that they're all going to play a role in different books within this series. Chloe has a couple of friends there as well. I think one of them gets together with one of the cousins. Actually, she kind of gets together with two of the cousins, but that's like a whole other book in the series. And they have this bar that's next door to a sex club, and that's why it's called the Red Door series, is there's a red door, which, by the way, it sounds like the most boring sex club I've ever read about in a romance novel. It is not, I don't know, it felt so PG as far as sex clubs went, and I was just like, wait a second, this is a book that every chapter has some sort of sexual activity happening, but when we get to an honest to God sex club, all that's happening is people doing shibari demonstrations on a stage. Like, it just, I don't know. I just felt really weird, but I love their community. They're very supportive. You know, when they are in a relationship, Jesse and Taylor will introduce Chloe and each other as their partners. Oh, this is my partner, and this is my other partner. This is my boyfriend and girlfriend. Like, I really loved how open they were with each other. I thought that was really sweet. But that being said, I don't think I liked this enough to go on to read more in this particular series.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, you know, like a part of, on the one hand, like I said, I lean I don't have OCD, but I lean a little bit obsessive at times.
Okay.
And I have a hard time not. So I decided very deliberately, and this already sort of broke my brain a little bit, was to start with book 2 in the series. Like, I'm going to start, and I'm just going to read this because I wanted to read it without reference to other books. I wanted to know how it stood alone and how it told its story. There were those sort of loose ends. Mm-hmm. You know, there's this whole passage of her friend being effectively kidnapped from the sex club.
That was the part that I'm assuming gets answered in book 1.
What the fuck is happening? Like, I don't understand. Like, because it's not just that it's what the fuck is happening, but then afterwards,
there's no follow-up.
We're all just fine.
There's no follow-up whatsoever.
There's no aftercare. There's no whatever. We're just done. And I was like, wow, that's jarring.
Mm-hmm. And we don't really have to talk about it. But the other thing that I did think was interesting that, again, I feel like this could have been a lot more attention paid to this, is the aspect of the paparazzi and like what it means to be famous and like how to have this kind of non-traditional relationship when you're in the public sphere. To me, that would have been a fascinating story, because I don't think the world is necessarily ready to embrace a polyamorous romance. Like, there are a lot of people who are fine with it. I mean, I remember a year or two ago when we saw those photos of Taika Waititi and Rita Ora and who was the other one? And they were like making out at a restaurant. Everybody was like, yes, this is incredible. But that's not our idea of the typical relationship. And so when you're being followed by cameras and going on tour and you have a label that's counting on you to make money, and when you're not because of your image, bad things happen. I think that could have been a whole book unto itself. So, you know, I don't have a lot more to say about that. It just would have been a different story that I might have been a little more interested in reading. But overall, that's just kind of what was missing for me in this book, was more of the story as opposed to just the sex, the lube-less sex.
There was a lot of lube-less sex.
A lot. There is definitely a variety. Like, when we give this some ratings, as far as like the heat content goes, I think I have to give it a 10 just because of the amount of sex scenes that are in it and the variety. I mean, we have got male, we have got male-female, we have got male-female, we have got double penetration, we've even got double vaginal penetration, there is everything under the sun happening, all of which is happening without lube, might I add. But it's, you know, the spice of life. There's definitely a lot of different things happening. Did you have a specific sex scene or sexcerpt that you wanted to share or discuss?
You know, this is the part of my homework assignment that I struggled with, only because there were
There's so many.
There were so many.
I stopped highlighting. I just stopped highlighting them.
But there, so you kind of always look at like the firsts,
Mm-hmm.
right? Those matter. I ended up kind of landing on the first time that the three of them walked in knowing that they were going to have
Okay.
sex with each other.
Okay.
Is this the best sex scene or the hottest sex scene of the book? Not necessarily, but this is the first, in my mind, fully consensual sex
Okay.
scene. I'm just going to read this 2 paragraphs, and this doesn't even get all the way into
Okay.
the full threesome. This is more the sort of intros that says, Chloe was in the ensuite doing whatever it is girls do to get ready for bed. He, Taylor, and Jessie undressed, and once they were naked, he kissed that mouth. Taylor trailed his fingers down Jessie's spine, past the cleft, and circled the puckered flesh he'd soon be inside of without a sheath of latex separating them. The truth was, they'd all be well fucked by sunrise, because he and Jessie were still as consumed with each other as they had been 7 years ago. Taylor's dick got even harder when Chloe stepped into the room. He could see her ripe cherry nipples protruding through the thin cotton garment she wore. She tried to hide her surprise at finding them already naked on the bed, stroking each other as they always did, but he saw it. For a split second, her pretty hazel eyes widened and her lips parted in a silent gasp. She just stood there like she wasn't sure what to do or if she should do anything at all.
Okay. That was actually, I highlighted a passage that was like same scene, different part of the scene, but definitely in there. And I think you're right. I think that is actually one of the better ones, where it kind of takes a turn for like where I started to enjoy the book. And I really do think it's because of that clear consent between the three of them. Everybody is on the same page with everybody's feelings. And up until that point, we haven't had that clear understanding.
If you are someone who likes your romance, either behind closed doors, like no, there are no doors.
Oh, no.
There are no doors at all.
The reason I tend to really enjoy slow burn romance is because there's a buildup. There's this buildup leading up to this epic release. But if I'm having release after release, every page, every chapter, there's never the buildup in between. So it just feels unfulfilling to me. It feels like I'm just being given the end result as opposed to how we got to the end result. And so that made it sound like it was math, but it's just
for real.
I think we've covered a lot of affinity here, and so I think it's time for us to give this book a few grades. And for this podcast, we grade for heart, humor, and heat on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the very best that it could be, subjectively, of course, in your opinion. So I'm going to go against the grain and say let's start with heat. I feel like normally we start with heart, but this one for me, as far as heat goes, compared to the rest of the books we review for this podcast, I have to give it a 10 just because of how much sex is being had. Is it my favorite sex that's being had? No. But I think if I'm to tell people how steamy a book is, this is a 10 for me.
Oh yeah. I think so. This is a aspirational for certain for a certain segment of the population to just want to have it all the time, and like, how do they have time to work? Like, for real. But yes, there's a both a frequency and an intensity, and the sex scenes are explicit.
Yeah. Oh, very, very. All right. Well, then let's work our way backwards. We started with heat. Let's go to humor, which I'm gonna guess is probably gonna be the lowest rating. I mean, I feel like at first I was thinking I would give it a not applicable, just like, because it's by no means a rom-com. Like, it is not meant to be funny. I will say I do like the dynamic between Jesse and his cousins. I think there is like a little bit of humor with the other men. So I might give it like a 2, a maybe a 2.
Yeah, it's pretty low, a 1 or a 2 for me. Like, the problem for me is that whenever anything remotely funny happened, the men would laugh or the men would chuckle, and Chloe would giggle.
Ugh.
And I didn't like that was the language that was
Because she's
used.
a woman.
She's the little one, the little woman. And so I didn't love that. But there was some effort to have some
camaraderie.
Repartee and camaraderie and that kind of thing. So like there was space for it.
Yeah. It's not a major component of the story, and it could have been. I mean, it could have been. Honestly, I'd like to read more funny polyamorous romance. I think that would be a joy, because
that'd be amazing.
It would be so far from what is already out there as far as poly romance goes. Like, so I would love that. All right, and then the heart, I feel like, is going to be somewhere in between the humor and the heat. What are you thinking?
I put the heart actually lower than humor.
Really?
If I had to give it 3 separate scores, then it would be, a 10 on heat, a 2 on humor, and a 1 on heart. Because I felt like it was this Hallmark,
which is
love at first sight. Right, I know, right? Well, I was initially going to go with Disney-fied, and that was that was a bridge too far. But there was this he loves her, but he doesn't know what her family of origin is, or where her mother is, or what her relationship is with her, any other family. He doesn't talk about what she wants to do with her life. It doesn't even sound like he really understands what she's going to college for. To me, the heart is the hardest thing. Like, it's easy to have sex. Tab A, slot B, or some combination thereof. Like, that's fairly easy. And humor, being naked with somebody is kind of funny. Do you know what I mean?
Oh,
like,
for sure.
You just have, there's, like, if you can't laugh with this person, you're definitely not going to have a good orgasm with them. I feel like that's just sort of
that should be another t-shirt.
It should. You can have that one. But that feels like a metric in there somewhere. Is that like, because you have to have your guard down a little bit to laugh with somebody.
Yeah.
And you have to have your guard down a little bit to have good sex with somebody.
Yeah.
A heart is the most difficult, and you really have to be vulnerable, which they spend the first 35% of the book lying. And everybody around, like, I also, just as a sort of personal note, is in college, I was in a long-term relationship where my partner was serially unfaithful. And everybody around us knew.
Oh, I hate that.
That they were being unfaithful. And I was the only one that didn't. And so that kind of just hit that nerve of like, that's not heart. That's just fucking. And it doesn't feel like any of them are putting the work into it. They're still in this honeymoon people-pleasing phase.
Yeah.
And that's not heart to me. That's cute.
I'm with you. I'm not a fan of, we call them insta-love stories in romance. It's not my favorite. Like, there are certain books I've read that are insta-love or instant attraction, instant lust that I can get on board with. But here's my thing is, even if it's this insta-love attraction at first sight, I still want to see them getting to know the other person. I still want to see them, because I think there still needs to be a vested interest in you. It's love at first sight, whether you believe in it or not. That's not it. Like, that, it can't just end there. Like, oh, I'm in love with them. The end. We're together. Like, because also the idea that both partners see each other at once, or in this case, three partners see each other at once, and it's like, that's it, we're getting married. Doesn't matter who this human being is or what their background is or whatever. We're gonna marry them regardless. It's a lot. Like, and I think it's a lot for one person to experience, let alone 2, let alone 3. I'm gonna put it a little bit higher than you, but it's still not getting a high score. I'm probably going to give the heart a 3, just because I do think it gets better later on. And I do really like the love that exists within their friend group. I do think that there is something there that's bonded them so close. It seems like they're all very open to having relationships with multiple partners, with multiple partners of different genders. So I really did love that. I think there's a good shared mutual respect amongst them. But I was more invested in their friendship relationships than I was in their romantic relationship. There's 3 of them. I'll give it a 3.
There you go.
I don't know. What do you think? Now, having discussed this, do you think you will read any more in the series?
I have to decide. I might do it just, as more than anything out of the thought exercise. Like a part of me wonders.
Mm-hmm.
I might read the whole thing to see if I have all of the other facets put together and I get a better sense of who's what. Maybe I'm not. I don't know. I have to think about this. This is all, this was within the past week that I read this, and I'm still sort of
digesting it all.
Yeah.
Well, and I will say, for as much as we had issues with this book has an average 4.4 rating on Goodreads and over 300 reviews. So, I mean, there are plenty of people that clearly enjoy this book, and maybe they're fans of Dyan Layne. Maybe they're fans of the series as a whole. Maybe this was the first polyamorous romance they've ever read, and it was groundbreaking for them. I don't know. We all have our own experiences. We all bring our own backgrounds to each book that we read. So everybody's going to have their own unique read. Please don't let this hinder your reading experience of this book. Just know that I don't think I'll be reading anymore. I will say I am kind of curious about one of the cousins, Brendan. Like, he seems like he's kind of the more guarded. I feel like I know the least about him. And so, of course, that makes me want to know more about him. But just because of the writing style and like how this book went, I don't know if I'm invested in reading more.
The problems that I had with it are more about, I guess, me wanting to, me thinking about like the experiences that I have and the experiences that my friends have described, and feeling like this isn't quite it.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't quite on.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of comparable to if you're reading a book that somebody writes about visiting a foreign country and then you learn later that they've never been there.
Yeah, major issue.
Bigger picture, I can see why people get into that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, good for them.
Yeah, honestly. And if people listening have read the series or they've just read Affinity, let me know. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Like I said, just the fact that you listen to the podcast, whether you agree with me or not, makes me happy. Send me a message. Let me know. Tell me that Brendan gets his happy ending, whatever it might be. Read what you're going to read. Enjoy it if you do. And if you don't, that's okay. Don't feel bad about it. Well, this has been lovely, Kate. I really enjoyed this conversation. And you're going to have to let me know if you decide to read more in the series, because of course I'm going to want to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, of course.
I appreciate it. And hopefully everyone listening at home picks up a bottle of lube with this book, because honestly, if they had marketed this book with like a bottle of lube, that would have made a lot of things better. But it's still not the same because they don't use it. I can't get over it. I'm never going to get over it. But you know what? That's
also, for real, hydrate.
Yeah,
hydrate. Also, seriously,
hydrate
people.
and lube up. That's the message of the day. Thanks so much for listening. Boobies and Newbies is part of the Frolic Podcast Network. Find more podcasts you'll love at frolic.media/podcasts. You can follow Boobies and Newbies on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Boobies Podcast.